Let's start with Judge Boasberg. Professor Luther, is it consistent with the judge's oath of office to sign an order for which there is zero basis in law and zero basis in fact?
Absolutely not.
Is it consistent with a judge's oath to do whatever a prosecutor asks him without inquiring as to the facts or the law?
It's completely inconsistent.
Judge Boasberg signed multiple orders. I'm holding one of them in my hand. That's his signature at the bottom. Ordering the phone companies who had been subpoenaed not to disclose to the members of the Senate and the members of the House that their phone records had been subpoenaed. As you noted in your testimony, that order is directly contrary to federal statute. Congress in 2004 made it illegal for a phone company to disclose a senator's phone records without notifying the senator in question. Is there any basis for a judge to disregard unambiguous federal statutory language?
Absolutely not.
Judge Boasberg signed an order that says, quote, "The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure," in other words, informing the senators their phone records had been subpoenaed, "will result in the destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation." Is there any conceivable basis for Judge Boasberg signing that, particularly given Jack Smith's testimony now that Judge Boasberg had no idea whose phone records he was signing off on?
I've been struggling for the last few weeks to come up with one, but I can't. And I'll mention we wouldn't even know about this if it weren't for Chairman Grassley's oversight efforts.
That is true. And Professor Vladeck, you suggested the remedy for an erroneous decision is appeal. Judge Boasberg signed a secret non-disclosure order that was ex parte with only the Department of Justice in front of him. Is there any conceivable universe in which anyone could appeal that?
So, Senator, as you know, there are circumstances in which the providers can decline to comply. Indeed, I believe in one of the cases, Verizon actually said it was not going to comply with the NDO. I believe that's part of the record as well. And those orders are themselves also subject to challenge in court. Now, Senator, you and I have had this conversation for a long time about how there are lots of gaps in federal law when it comes to the targets of surveillance not being able to object.
Did the targets of surveillance know about this?
No, but I would also remind—
Could the senators whose records were subpoenaed contrary to federal law appeal it?
So, no, but of course, Judge Boasberg didn't know, first, that these were senators, second, that their
nor did
communications were
he,
covered
Professor
by
Vladeck, nor did he inquire. And in fact, I'm going to go back to Professor Luther's statement, because in an ordinary circumstance, a judge entering an order that he doesn't know who it's applying to, he doesn't know any facts, he doesn't know anything, on the ordinary basis, you'd say, yeah, there's zero basis in fact, but there is actually an explanation for why he did so. Because Judge Boasberg did know one thing. He knew that Jack Smith was a partisan Democrat engaged in an effort to go after Donald Trump, that he was subpoenaing over 400 Republicans. So the one thing he knew is all of these targets were Republicans. So the only conceivable basis for Judge Boasberg signing these orders one after the other is an animus that says every Republican on planet Earth, every American who voted for Donald Trump, there is reasonable basis to believe they are criminals.
Senator,
I'm done with your question.
I'm sorry.
There is no other basis for his signing that order. He knew that. He knew Jack Smith. Welcome to the fast food counter at McDonald's. Whatever you want, all the fries you want, I will sign, ordered, ordered, ordered. That is perfectly fine if you are the chairman of the DNC. Being a partisan hack, or for that matter, the chairman of the RNC, either side can be partisan hacks. Judges are expected not to be. And I would point out this is a pattern we've seen before for 4 years during the Biden DOJ. We saw the Department of Justice refuse to enforce the law when violent protesters were outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. It was directly contrary to 18 U.S.C. Section 1507. It was a felony on national television being committed over and over and over again. And Merrick Garland, a rogue partisan attorney general, refused to enforce the law. Why? Because he supported the objectives of the protesters. That kind of hypocrisy, let me be clear. I would object to an order that found Democrat members of the Senate, absent real and meaningful evidence were likely to be criminals. That's what Judge Boasberg signed off on. By the way, Judge Boardman, Mr. Chamberlain, what are the consequences of a partisan left-wing judge concluding, because of my ideology, coming to attempt to assassinate a Supreme Court justice is okay? I'm going to give you a slap on the wrist. I'm going to deviate down 22 years and release you when you're 35 years old so you can terrify other judges. What are the consequences of that?
Potentially devastating to the republic. You encourage a lot more people to try assassinations. And I mean, guys have to think through what the consequences would be of successful assassinations. We'd get to a world something like Spain pre-World War II or Algeria. I think this country's had 160 years without civil war. They've been a lot better than the ones that we had a civil war in.
And I'm going to recognize in a moment, Ranking Member Whitehouse, I will note, I'm going to make a prediction of my Democrat colleagues that we're going to go through this hearing without any of them daring to talk about Judge Boardman, that they'd rather scream about Trump and MAGA, and Boasberg they could sort of wrap into we really dislike Trump. But my Democrat colleagues want to claim they are against judicial violence. Let me be absolutely clear. If anyone attempts to assassinate a judge, even the most left-wing judge with whom I disagree strongly, I would advocate prosecuting that attempted murderer and locking them up as long as they were breathing on planet Earth. Unfortunately, I have not heard any of my Democrat colleagues be willing to express the same sentiment.